Welcome to Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here is the podcast host, James Delingpole.
This is a Breitbart news production. Welcome to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole. And I can tell you, you are in for a treat this week. I know you've all been hungering for this man. He's looking rather embarrassed, thinking, what have I got myself into? I'm sitting in the office, which he's never had visitors here before, apparently. It's so remote. His name is Tim Martin. He is the founder of the Wetherspoons chain, and he's a prominent Brexiteer. Welcome to the podcast, Tim.
Thank you, James. Thank you very much.
Are you aware you have actually become quite a kind of cult figure among us Brexiteer types?
Well, I'm not within my family, so it's good to know I've got supporters elsewhere, but I wasn't really aware.
Do you get disrespect from your family like I do?
A certain amount, yeah. Well, probably a good thing.
They're not all Remainers, are they?
No, there might be one or two among them, but we don't fall out over politics in all seriousness.
We had a similar thing in our family where it was almost like the English Civil War, where brothers and cousins fought against each other in battles, and several of my family were on the wrong side, but we managed to overcome that.
I was brought up largely in Northern Ireland, and it's not as entrenched, but it's the first sign I've seen in the UK since I've been over here for 40 odd years that people can adopt similar attitudes.
What do you mean? The sectarian attitude, you mean?
It is really, to a considerable degree, sectarianism. I mean, I'm looking at it from my end of the prism, but the idea that Remainers were racist, less intelligent, etc., had overtones of the sectarianism from Northern Ireland.
We were noticing this on the drive here. We followed a car with Brexit in the window, a sticker, the EU flag, and Brexit, or something like. I didn't vote Brexit, or something. Brexit, not in my name. And I was thinking about what it was about this sticker which was so unpleasant. I was thinking some people used to have Countryside March stickers in their back windows, and I was thinking, is there a similarity? And then it occurred to me, no, but it's that word shit, and also it's the idea that somehow the people voted on something, and this person is saying, screw you people, I hate what you do, I hate everything you stand for. It's nasty, isn't it?
It's pretty nasty. It's pretty entrenched. I mean, it may well go the other way, I suppose, to try and be broad-minded about it, but it's definitely triggered the emotions in the UK in a way that I haven't seen many other things do over the years.
Well, I think you're 10 years older than me. I mean, I don't remember in my lifetime a period when there was quite such division over any issue.
Exactly.
Before we go on, and you're going to say some encouraging things, I hope, about Brexit, that it's not all over yet, and we are going to get our way. I wanted to talk about how you became Tim Martin. I mean, is it fair to describe you as a failed barrister turned publican?
Yes. I mean, except that I never really wanted to succeed at being a barrister. Yeah. But I was used to, if you work hard at some particular narrow area like the law, that you can do well. But I found that with the law I couldn't, so I actually did work quite hard, hoping to come out with a good degree. But I discovered I could only read about half the pace of other people who were much more talented. So it was quite a blow to the ego. So yes, definitely failure. And then after that, after I left uni, I decided I wanted to become a squash player. I could have been I was a rugby player, and I could have probably done well at that. But I decided as a 17-stone, 22-year-old, never really having played squash, I'd try and become a great squash player, which was a complete debacle. So I had two failures, really, just before I started in the pub trade. So not everything turns to gold. So it's quite interesting. But I wasn't frightened to have a tilt at things, I think. So that's probably more of a characteristic of someone who starts a business and keeps it going for a long time.
Isn't that one of the secrets about making it? You've got to fail numerous times before you
just keep sticking at it the whole time is probably one of the things. Yeah.
So did you have the kind of parents who wanted you to get on and wanted you to join the professions and become respectable?
I suppose that my old man, when I was very young, was in the RAF, and his old man had been in the RAF, and my grandfather in Ireland was a respectable guy. All the family worked hard, so I think they wanted you to get on. I think I was the first one in the extended family to go to uni. Which was much less common 45 years ago than it is today. Yeah. So I think normal enough in the expectation levels.
Yeah. What is your accent, by the way?
It's 10 years of Northern Ireland and 5 years of New Zealand.
That's it. Because it's like no accent I've heard ever.
No, it's rather grating, most people find. But
no, I was thinking the opposite, actually, because I tell you what, it makes you sound like a man of the people rather than a kind of remote toff.
Well, it's quite funny because one of the things I notice is I used to have to get pub licenses. I used to be a witness in court to try and get a pub license. And you used to have to prove a need in the area. And I was very successful with the company was successful. And I often said, I think having a neutral accent that people can't place is very successful. So if you're an old Etonian in Birmingham Magistrates Court, it might have been quite difficult. And if you were a Brummie in Windsor Magistrates Court, there might also be certain levels of prejudice. So hardly anyone knows Kiwis, so it's quite good to be identified with the Antipodeans.
Well, hang on a second though. So you were raised in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
So when did you have your Kiwi phase?
The ages of 10 to 15.
And you picked... Okay.
And then another 3 years back in Northern Ireland. So I was regarded as being a Kiwi for quite a long time, which I never discouraged.
Right.
The nearest I've come to a disguise.
And so tell me about the journey to Wetherspoon's success. I mean, you started off... Did you buy a pub or something?
Well, I left uni with a law degree in Nottingham, and I decided to chuck it in, got a job, 6 months working in a factory, and then 6 months selling advertising space. And I thought I might as well do the second part of the law. And I actually was lucky enough to get a grant to go back to study law again and qualified. But I was struggling with it, and I started going to a pub in Muswell Hill in North London, which had been converted from a bookies, a tiny little pub converted from a shop, which was very unusual in those days. Almost all the pubs in London belonged to brewers, and this pub sold a wide variety of beers. So I got to know the owner, who didn't like running it, and 10 months after he'd set it up, rather like the little craft beer pubs you see today, the micro pubs, he said, why don't you take it over? So I took over his 8-year lease of a shop in Muswell Hill, which had been converted from a bookies, and ran it really badly for a few years, but gradually didn't make the same mistake more than 2 or 3 times in a row, and gradually learned how to do it, and had the great advantage of not being owned by a brewer. So we had a lot of natural trade while we were learning the job, and then managed to get planning and licensing permission for a second unlicensed shop in Crouch End and Haringey, and it went on from there really, just one at a time, opening pubs from converted shops.
Well, so you were obviously pretty ambitious then, because you weren't content just to be a publican. You wanted a chain. Is that right?
Yeah, I think I probably, no one likes to say they're ambitious, but probably that is right. I was ambitious. I wanted to make a mark.
And what were you rubbish at when you were initially running the pub? What big mistakes did you make?
I made every mistake going. I was only 24, so the first thing I thought was, this is free beer, and which I drank too much of. I didn't know how to deal with customers. I wasn't very good with staff. I lacked a lot of the technical knowledge, because running pubs is quite a technical job. There's a tremendous amount of information you need as to how you clean a dishwasher, how you make a coffee, how you rack up beer, etc. And I hadn't been through the apprenticeship.
Right. When you say you were bad with customers, did you lack kind of people skills or what? Or
yeah, I mean, I'd come from a sort of rugby playing background, so you tended to think that people were influenced by the 6'6" second row mentality. But I discovered that you can't be the toughest guy in Muswell Hill, let alone anywhere else in London or elsewhere. So a bit too confrontational, and not realising that you have to get people a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that I went round whacking people over the head, but you have to be very delicate in your public relations if you're dealing with customers and running a pub. I hadn't thought about it.
In fact, I hadn't even though you're big, I hadn't thought of you as being aggressive.
Well, I'd be exaggerating if I said I was aggressive, but I think it's quite tough for people running individual pubs, because even if you're not aggressive, people might be aggressive with you. I think you forget that when a company gets bigger and people know you're unlikely to bend if they put pressure on you. Running pubs as an individual tenant, lessee, free house owner is much tougher than it looks.
Right. Do you get kind of gangsters and things trying to muscle in on your act, trying to get cut or anything like that?
We certainly don't now, but I think that, and I think for
for
all its faults, the UK is a pretty law-abiding country. But certainly I think you can get a bit of bullying from some local peoples in some cases.
Right.
And it's very difficult for individual publicans to deal with. Some are good at it, some aren't, but it's actually quite a frightening job in some respects.
And what was the clever thing that you worked out that nobody? Because I mean, you're now. I mean, I don't know whether these figures are accurate, but I've seen you're worth more than, in dollars, maybe 400 million. Is that fair?
Probably quite a lot of money, yeah, if you totted it all up, yeah.
So, okay, so you've done pretty well, let's say.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, everyone else, every other publican in the world would like to have done what you've done, but they didn't. What was your clever trick?
I think I was a real ale drinker, and I really liked ales which weren't brewed by the big brewers, because I'd had them in Nottingham where I went to uni, but not in London, and I perceived correctly that there were a lot of other people like me. And so whether you call that a bit of luck, a bit of judgment, a bit of instinct, that was one of the things that propelled it on. And I think then the other thing was, after a while, realising that I didn't know much, that the collective intelligence of the public was much greater than my own, of the staff and the public. So really what we've become after a few years was people who absorbed information from customers, suggestions, and adapted what we did. So the real danger in running a business is a big ego, because you don't want to defer to those little suggestions that are made daily and weekly, and that you need that result in you making the changes you need to make.
Right. Yes. Somebody, I can't remember who was telling me. Somebody was telling me that one of the things about Wetherspoons is that it's one of the few places you can guaranteed to get a reasonably priced pint. How much are they? In
well,
London,
it does
say?
vary, but we're normally about 20% less than the competition wherever we trade, and we usually have we in a lot of our pubs now we've got you can get 2 or 3 different types of pints for about $1.90, from $1.99 to $2.29. So it is a lot
in London.
Surely not. In a lot of suburban London, not in central London. Yeah.
What are you paying in central?
About another £1.
So what, £3? Still, I mean,
you can get a pint for £3. Yeah.
Other pubs you're paying £5 or £6, aren't you?
Yeah. So we're
shocking.
We're definitely lower and busier.
And you do still do real ales and stuff. Is that part of your?
We still do half a dozen real ales per pub.
Blimey.
And quite a few craft beers, a lot of bottled beers, a lot of spirits. I think we've probably got a wider range than most pubs. And possibly another thing we've done, which set us apart, based on partly on personal instinct, was not having music. We've got a few pubs which have music, but 90% of them have no music whatsoever. And so it's there's quite a substantial minority of people in the UK who even if they like music, don't want to hear it in the pubs. And that's been a big factor. You know what it's like these days. You go into a lift, or you go to a hotel reception. There's music bearing out. I even went on Heathrow Express, a train, the other day, and you had to listen to a television on the train. So I wrote to Heathrow Express owners and said, "Just come off a bloody plane. I don't want to listen to this television." They said, "Our customers like to stay connected," and I thought, how ridiculous.
Yeah, how do you're just saying this. You don't even, you have no evidence that your customers like this crap. I bet they don't. You're right.
Stay connected. You can look at your phone if you want to stay connected.
But you're right. This is why I'm not going to become a pub millionaire, because I would have taken it as a given that you're in a pub, you want music. But no.
Well, no, I think a lot of people like to go to a pub to chat, read the paper, read the specky.
What, in Wetherspoons?
I remember 25 years ago when I first moved to Exeter, I went for a pint in a pub called the Huntsman in a place called Ede, and I was reading the Spectator, and there was a cricket team down from London, and a wife of one of the players came up and said, "Look, there's someone here reading the Spectator."
What? It's civilised down here after all. Yeah. And Boy, who you met earlier, was telling me that one thing you can do is if it's your birthday, people can order anytime. Is this right? You've got this thing where you can order online for people you don't know.
Well, it's very weird because we've got an app, so you can order off an app.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a really stellar idea because you can go to the bar and order a drink. I thought that was what people did in pubs, so you don't want to sit down there and not talk to whoever's behind the bar. But in fact, it's been successful. But you can order it on an app not only for the pub you're at, but for someone else at another pub. So you've got these chancers who say, "It's my birthday in 3 days. I'm going to be 31 and a half.
Yeah.
Would you buy me a free drink?" And it happens a bit, but I think it's only a lark, really.
Well, what I heard is that one of the most popular items is people buy a plate of peas because that's funny.
Yes,
and weird cocktails and horrible, disgusting things and all sorts.
Exactly. So they deserve it if that's what they're trying to get people to buy them a free drink.
So you say you didn't think that was going to work. So somebody else must have invented that thing.
In the company, yeah. Well, again, I think it's not going too much on what I say, and so that will apply to so many things. So many of the ideas aren't mine.
And you're also famous for visiting your pubs.
Yes.
How many do you do a week?
I try and never drop below 10. And
what do you do when you go to the... 'cause I mean, you must be instantly recognisable now, and everyone goes, "Oh."
Well, not in my short skirt and high heels, funnily enough. When a 7-foot gal wanders into the pub, they do look a bit worried. But in all seriousness, I do get recognised mostly now in the pubs. Since the referendum, before then much less so, but since the referendum I get recognised. But yeah, I took the train on Friday to Swansea, and then visited a couple of pubs on foot, and got a cab then to Gorsinon, Neath, Bridgend, and ended up in Cardiff. Stayed in Cardiff and did a few the next morning, and then headed back to where I live. So that's typically what I do. And
when you go there, do you order a pint, or do you?
The first thing I do is I call it stand back and look. So you look at the pub. I try and park half a mile away from the pub and wander into the town and look at the pub from the outside and say, how does it appear to me, as if I'm a customer? and write down any comments that I make. Go into the pub, say hello to the staff, order I call it a taster, which anyone can order if you want to try. Order a taster of 2 different real ales, and then I introduce myself to all the staff, say hello, thanks for your work, and then I sit down and have a chat for 15-20 minutes to whoever's in charge on that day. Invariably speak to a customer or two, tell them I'm either completely right over Brexit or, in a minority of cases, completely wrong, and then leave. But I make notes on every pub call and send them, type them up, and they get distributed to everyone at the head office.
I was thinking actually about that. In fact, we can talk about that in the next section. So I'll put the pubs to bed first. But when was the moment when you suddenly realised that you'd been quite successful? Was there a kind of day when you suddenly thought, "Oh, I've done rather well"?
I think it's always relative, with this sort of thing. So I wasn't that successful at squash, but I was never as low on the squash ladder as I am on the rich list, So you're always, there's always greater. I'm not religious, but in the Bible it says there's always greater and lesser. But I suppose really, I didn't have financial worries, personal financial worries, having had a lot building up the business once we floated on the stock market, because we were able to reduce our debts. But up to that point, when I was 37, I'd had financial pressure, as all small businessmen do.
Yeah, but 38, you were sorted.
Yes.
Did you? When you realised that you were quite comfortably off, was there anything you bought yourself as a treat?
Well, when we floated on the stock market,
Yeah.
I've always driven a Volvo.
Yeah.
And I bought a BMW, and it parked outside my office in Finchley in North London, and it got broken into before I had even been in it. And it got broken into 9 times in the next 2 years. And no one had ever tried to break into my Volvo. And so I went back to a Volvo.
I bet you did. There's a lesson there, isn't there?
There is. It's so much better to be part of the general population, the flotsam and ebbsam,
The riffraff.
The riffraff. It's so much. Life is much more fun than being on some lonely big estate with your own helicopter.
I hope you've got that as well, though. Please tell me you've got a helicopter.
No, I haven't got a helicopter.
Tight-fisted bastard.
No yachts, no helicopter.
Oh, dear.
But
you've got an estate?
No, I haven't got an estate. I've got a house.
Yeah, with a nice big garden.
But there's a quote I remember reading from my history A-level at school. What is it? I'm no saint, no Spartan, no reformer, which was the first British Prime Minister said that, apparently.
Oh, did he? Right, okay. Yeah, and that's you. Okay. This is a Breitbart news production. You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest, Tim Martin. More in a moment.
Breitbart News Daily with Alex Marlow.
Why did we see some of the Republican kissing of Mark Zuckerberg that was taking place?
I called it kissing the ring because I felt like every single person practically had to kiss the ring of this guy, who wants to do nothing except get all those people out of office. So, bizarre behavior from the Republicans.
Breitbart News Daily, weekdays at 6 a.m. Eastern on SiriusXM Patriot 125.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
This is a Breitbart news production, and this is the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest, Tim Martin.
Can I get a tea from
Yes, you can get of course you can get your tea. This is real life actually happening as we record. Tim's going to get his tea. So one of the brilliant things you did, Tim, during the Brexit campaign was you printed these beer mats challenging the Remainers, who were, because the Remainer establishment have been pretty powerful, haven't they? They've been using taxpayers' money basically to come up with Cameron produced this document which said that all sorts of terrible things were going to happen, and that heavily hinting that if you didn't vote for Remain, that it was going to be disaster. And you were one of the few voices in the real world, as opposed to commentators like me, who countered that argument with your beer mats. What did they say?
Well, I think we had 2 or 3 varieties, but I think when we boiled it down, we said that the Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, the head of the IMF, the head of the OECD, etc., were all very closely interconnected.
Yeah.
And they weren't independent people offering views that the country would immediately go down the pan on the 24th of June 2016. So that was the main message. This is bollocks.
Yeah.
That was the main message.
Because that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because how many pubs have you got?
900.
900?
I know, it's difficult to sound modest when you say that.
That is. And do you rent the freehold, or do you own it?
And we own about 60%.
So you've got a property empire as well as a...
I've got a property empire, but a certain amount of it's represented by debt, as with all property empires.
Okay.
Yes, we don't own them all. We
Right.
haven't paid off the mortgage, James, put it that way.
Okay. But nevertheless, I suppose what I'm angling at here is that you've got this... You can hear the jungle drums because you can feel the pulse of the nation, I think, better than a lot of politicians can, because you've got this network of pubs where... What age group would you say you've got mainly? Sort of 18 to...
18 to 90, I would say. We corner... Well, we don't corner any market, but we've got a lot of students attracted by lower prices and so on. At the other end of the spectrum, we've got a lot of... I would say we've got a higher percentage of retirees, as they say now, than any other company. So what people most say about our pubs is they've got a wider cross-section than most other pubs they see.
Interesting. Because I suppose that they aren't specific, are they? I mean, they all look similar. They're designed to look similar, aren't they? To get a similar experience.
Well, I would say there may be some similarities, but we've given our designers a lot of scope, and we've tried to create individual pubs with an individual name, individual design, individual artwork. So we've not tried to follow the Starbucks and McDonald's, what the Americans call cookie cutter approach.
So the exact opposite of what I just said, which shows what bollocks
right,
I'm talking.
Don't worry, a lot of people make that mistake.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, come back to my point, which is that you kind of know where Britain is, really, where people feel. And when you came out for Brexit, did you notice that people were more on your side than not on your side?
Well, the history I'd had is that I'd been against the euro because, like a lot of people in 1992, with a mortgage and on my house and a business mortgage, which had doubled as a result of the predecessor of the euro, which was the exchange rate mechanism.
Yeah.
I opposed the euro, which was quite a big thing. It was almost as big as the referendum in a way. So then I went quiet for quite a few years and stayed away from anything like that.
Yeah.
But then when Cameron went across to say he felt the EU needed fundamental change, and came back and said he'd got it, I think that was the point when a lot of almost neutrals like me said that is just not true, and you haven't got fundamental change. You shouldn't have said you had, and in fact we'd be much better off with democracy because everyone could see that the EU was becoming more undemocratic.
Yeah, let's try democracy for a change.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, so was it? You must have been quite pissed off when Cameron came back waving his bit of paper and said, "I brought peace in our time with Europe," and it was worth nothing.
peace in our time. Because if he'd said, look, guys, I have to admit to you, I'm disappointed. The EU does need reform. I haven't been able to get nearly as much as I thought I would, but I still think we should remain, and I'm going to continue to campaign for reform. He would have had much more credibility. But what he made the fatal mistake of underestimating the intelligence of the public, and trying to kid him.
Yes. Well, you must have been at a premium during the Brexit debate, and actually you're at a premium now, because, as I said before, there's lots of maverick pundits like me who
we're all mavericks, James.
I suppose that's true. I was in this thing called. Were you in Brexit the movie?
I don't think I was actually in it.
You should. Well, I think you remember. But so we did this thing called Brexit the movie.
Yeah, I saw it.
We were making the kind of the case for a Britain outside the EU, and it was going to be a freebooting, buccaneering, like kind of the Singapore or Hong Kong of which is what we could be, I think. And going to the premiere, I was realising that in that cinema, had a bomb gone off, it would have wiped out the cause of intelligent politics in Britain forever. I mean, we were all there.
There's a thought.
You were. I heard you a lot on the radio and saw you on TV and stuff. You were up against all these businesses who were explaining that we had to remain in the EU. For what have you been able to decide what their argument is?
It's interesting. This may offend even you, but when I was opposing the euro, I thought it was very, very strange, because the idea was that you could join currencies together, and any observation of even an amateur could tell that if you want to have a viable currency, you have to have a government. And there was no government in the EU to gather in the taxes, redistribute the money around the place. And all the people who were in favour of the euro, vehemently, the CBI, the editor of the Financial Times, the guys who wrote at the Financial Times, Mandelson, Blair, Clark, I said on a programme, this is a middle-aged male Oxbridge thing. It seems to be almost entirely made up of male Oxbridge guys. And so when it came along, I realised then that this was not a rational thing. It was like the Northern Ireland thing, it was an ideology. So even though there's no church, if you take a church away from people, they think they're more modern and more liberal, but they adopt an idea, and the great idea, which it is to this day, is a Europhile ideal which will make humanity better, which is undemocratic, but that doesn't matter either if you're a religious zealot. So it's not just Oxbridge either, it's wider than that. But it's very much the religious seminaries of today are, I think, universities. That's one of the things that I noticed.
I think that's absolutely... Listen, can I say I'm totally unoffended by your... It is an Oxbridge problem. We sound like paranoid conspiracy theorists when we talk about this, the liberal elite, which is trying to hold back the democratic will. But actually, what are they doing now? They're proving our point, aren't they?
Yeah, I think it is. It's a very, very interesting situation, and I don't know what the answer is. Of course, the problem is that the elite is very, very influential and holds the highest positions of power. So if there is an element of religious zealotry, which I think there is, then the great thing is to have a democracy, because people see through it.
Yeah.
And they saw through the euro, and they saw through the arguments about doom and gloom from the elite prior to the referendum. So I think it's great to have these universities, provided they're subject to democratic control. And of course, this is a conspiracy theory. The EU gets a lot of money from the UK and returns about half of it, but the huge amount of it goes to Oxford and Cambridge universities, the richest universities. So it's sort of reverse Robin Hood. They don't give it to the University of West of England, and they're simply trying to buy influence, as they are with large landowners, because they get most money from the Common Agricultural Policy. So I hate to sound like a bigot myself, and I promised myself I wouldn't say that, but I do believe it.
No, actually, as a quite a large scale employer, how many do you employ, by the way?
40,000, believe it or not.
Okay, so you must have a handle on the kind of people that are coming out of universities and the quality of stuff. Are you finding that Generation Snowflake is kind of brainwashed with all this kind of Europhile crap, or are they?
Not in general. I think the snowflake generation, I think, is a bit of a myth. Really, we've all been different. All generations that have come along have successively been slightly better off than the previous ones. And I found the guys who've worked for us, whether they've been to university or not, have been pretty industrious, worked pretty hard.
That's rather the point I was reaching for. You said whether they've been to university or not. I was wondering whether actually people who've got this so-called qualification are actually any better as employees than people who haven't.
Well, in the pub world, it's difficult to say. A lot of our good people have got degrees, but
in gender studies.
Well, in whatever really,
right.
But a lot of them haven't. But I think there's no question that there are too many degrees now, which most people would probably agree with.
Yeah.
That it's become too much of a target-driven objective to have as many graduates as possible. But
well, that was Tony Blair, wasn't it?
And a lot of people with a lot of debt. Yeah, probably Tony Blair and others as well. No one's trying to reverse it, so you can't just blame him, I think.
No, well, it's true. I think when you and I were at university, probably less than 10% of the population went to university, and now it's 50.
Yeah.
Well, did Britain suddenly get brighter? I don't
and
think
so.
Still
doesn't. The one political thing I've tried to argue, apart from the Brexit type stuff, is that we should at least produce enough doctors, because it seems mad to produce so many graduates but to have to rely on nothing against overseas doctors. I definitely think we should have as many as we need, but it doesn't make sense not to produce that sort of person that is genuinely needed to contribute to the economy and the country.
So you go on TV and you come up against other businessmen arguing for Remain. For example, the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry. Why do they think Europe is a good thing when you're a business? You should be represented by the CBI, presumably, or not. What's their line? What?
Well, that's been a great mystery to me. And I simply couldn't understand it over the last 15 years, over the euro and the referendum. Why? And that's why I arrived at the conclusion I did, that they were the head of the CBI, Caroline Fairbairn, went to Oxford. She goes to Provence for her holidays. I think she's got a hotel over there. Before her, it was a guy called Adair Turner, similar type of guy.
Yes.
And there was a guy before that called John Banham, I think his name was. And they seem to represent a certain stratum of society, and they just believe in the God of Europe.
So what you're saying or hinting at is that the Confederation of British Industry doesn't really represent British industry. I mean, you meet real businessmen, you presumably in other fields. Where are they on this? Are they like you, or are they like the CBI?
Well, a lot of businessmen just run their own business, and they don't presume to have a view about the macroeconomic policies which should run the country. But I would say they probably are pretty split. The big boardrooms probably are of the Europhile type mostly. A lot of entrepreneurs, I would say, are more of the we believe in democracy and freedom along the lines of the Dysons and the JCBs and even Simon Wolfson's got something of the entrepreneur about him from Next. He's a Eurosceptic, so it is a bit split.
Well, is that, just to pick you on that point, is that a temperamental thing? Is it that entrepreneurs are by nature risk takers, they're buccaneers, so they're going to prefer the riskier option regardless? Or is it perhaps that they are not bound by that kind of corporate ethos, which tends to... I mean, one of the reasons, is it not the case, one of the reasons big corporations love the European Union is because it fills the world with regulations which they can wear comfortably because of their size, whereas smaller companies can't afford all this kind of these EU directives, and therefore they get closed down. I mean, isn't that...
There's a strong element of that. There was an article written in 2012 when the euro looked as if it was going to fold completely by a Financial Times journalist called Gillian Tett, and she'd argued with her old man, who was a manufacturing guy who didn't like the euro and wanted to keep sterling. And she and her Financial Times colleagues were massively in favour of the euro. And she tried to say, why were we like this? And what she put it down to was groupthink. And that's quite closely linked to what I've just said, which is the quasi-religious thing. And that happens in humanity. There are ideas that most people, or a lot of people, accept, which are complete nonsense. So some of the things that most of us believe today as true, in another 20, 30, 40 years, people will realise they aren't true.
I think there is a correlation between Europhilia and belief in the whole climate change thing.
Without a doubt.
I mean, Amber Rudd got the double yesterday.
She hit
in the Sunday Times.
Double six.
Saying not believing in Europe is as bad as not believing in climate change. It's just like, because the whole renewables thing is built into the system of the European Union. I mean, it's part of their business model now.
Yeah, it's a type of it's a way of thinking. It's a way of thinking linked to which I think something you wrote about, which is that people can't really say what they think now, so they're often resorting to social media type sources of information because you can't be direct. And I think what Amber Rudd was doing was a type of virtue signalling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much virtue signalling, and just writing off whole groups of, well, I suppose we're doing that to Remainers as well, but writing off whole groups of people without addressing their argument, which is, I find that whenever I've sat down with people who passionately believe in Remain, I've never been able to get anything concrete about what the benefits are of EU membership, and I mean, just your business. How has your business been affected in any way, either way, by the whole?
Well, it hasn't been affected at all. We had record sales, record profits last year, and we're still doing very well. And I think that the main way it'll be affected if we leave, which I hope we will do completely without a deal on the 29th or 30th of March next year, is that the government will have the power to eliminate tariffs on non-EU imports, so for the 93% of the world that isn't in the EU. So at the moment, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, Aussie Merlot, coffee, rice, they're all subject to EU tariffs. So prices will go down, we'll sell for less, our customers will be better off. And we'll avoid spending £600 per person, which is what this 39 billion quid comes to, and we can regain control of the fishing grounds. So that's straight away on day one.
Yeah,
The business will be better off and the country will be better off, provided someone is bold enough to take that initiative.
Yeah, well, in the next section we'll talk about your sort of optimistic version, which I share, by the way. I'm not feeling bleak. So the wine you sell, obviously, all the wine you sell is subject to no, the French wine isn't, presumably.
As it happens, and tariffs are invisible, so people don't know about them. I didn't even know there were tariffs on wine, but even though it's subject to tariffs, we buy most of our wine from the New World.
From the New World, okay.
Yeah.
So and what? That's 20% above what it would be if we were outside the EU.
Well, it's a little bit less than that because it's the tariffs are on the liquid, not the government duty, which makes up quite a bit of the pie. But still, it's a few billion per annum that the UK government is collecting from the public, even though they don't know it, and sending it off to Brussels every week or two. And so it'll bring down the prices in the shop. So what's not to like? That's got to be. You need a few pluses, and that's a good starting point.
No, we so need you out there explaining this stuff, because, as I keep saying, you're a real person, a real businessman. You know what's going on. And most people, I mean, when I say it, they just go, "Oh yeah, but he's bloody right-wing nutcase." They believe you. You're listening to the Delingpole podcast, a Breitbart news production, with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest, Tim Martin. More in a moment.
Breitbart News Tonight with Joel Pollack and Rebecca Mansour.
The real thing that the left is angry about is they're like, how could you allow these Russian memes? Somebody saw a meme and then they decided they had to vote for Trump. Or it must have been fake news. And by fake news, they mean conservative websites. Come on. But this is what the left thinks. Fake news. And by fake news, what they mean is shut down Breitbart.
Breitbart News Tonight. Weeknights starting at 9 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125. This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
This is a Breitbart news production. Welcome back to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my so exciting and wonderful guest, a total hero, I think we all agree, Tim Martin, Wetherspoons. He's helping save the world one pub at a time. Well, and a boy has asked me to ask you about Wetherspoons plates. As you can see, I'm pig ignorant about Wetherspoons, but he knows about them. What is it about plates?
Well, I know that we changed our plates to have a pattern on them, and there are blue plates with a pattern, but I'm a typical unobservant guy in some respects. I couldn't exactly tell you what the pattern is, but I know it was quite controversial. Some people really like our plates and some people don't, and I'm not sure what category your boy falls into in that, actually.
No, he's just raised the controversy, and we don't know where he is.
But the quite a funny thing happened. Wetherspoons become quite fashionable, funnily enough, over the last few years. Most of my career we've been unfashionable,
right?
But we became fashionable, and one of the factors was that someone looked at our carpets and said, "My God, they're all different." And so they're all made individually for the pubs. And I'd agreed this years ago, but hadn't really noticed, because whenever I go to our pubs, there's quite a lot of people there, and you're talking, etc., etc. And but someone did a book, and in Waterstone's Christmas, not the last one, the one before, it was in Piccadilly Circus. Our book of Wetherspoon carpets was featured, and it's a very funny book and a little article on each of the carpets, and so. People always a lot of people used to criticize the wavy patterns, but suddenly they realize we're not Starbucks. It's individual.
Right. Well, they're not sort of handcrafted, hand woven artisanal carpets. I mean, are they especially?
I doubt if they're hand woven, but they're individually produced. Don't ask me how. No. But
right. Okay. So if they're all swirly, I mean, when people have had a few drinks, I imagine that.
Well, maybe they think they're walking in a straight line and they're not.
Yeah.
But no, you have to realise that our customers almost never over-imbibe, James. You'd probably be aware of that.
What? Because what? Because there's some sort of...
Because they're so well behaved.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm with you. I'm with you. So how are we going to win this thing? Because at the moment, on this day, I mean... There's no reason to suspect that this will change much. We've got Project Fear 3.0 or 4.0.
Yeah, I make it 3, yeah.
Where they're wheeling out all this stuff about you're going to get new strains of mutant gonorrhea if we go for WTO rules. We're going to get diabetics are going to be dropping dead in the streets because the insulin supplies are going to be running out.
Malnutrition.
Obviously. I mean, how could we not have thought of that?
Yeah.
And they're going to release something like 70 discussion documents on the same day at the end of the summer recess, so that the MPs are going to be inundated with bureaucratic horror. And I mean,
it's crazy. It's crazy. I actually don't know what's going on, but I think one of the things you have to do sometimes is simplify. And you have to also take what actions you can and make as many positive moves as you can. So for me, what they should do, as I indicated, is say definitely free up the fishing, and so we regain control of the fishing grounds, eliminate tariffs, so immediately on leaving, prices in the shops go down, which boosts incomes. That's a plus. And don't pay 39 billion. So if that happens on the 30th of March, which I'm going to campaign for, just as simple as that, we make our own laws, that'll be fine. And we don't need to do anything else.
I wonder how many people are aware of this, actually, that if we get WTO rules, you're right, we don't pay that 39 billion. No. What's not to like about that?
Yeah, also people, when you say WTO rules, it sounds like a whole bunch of new rules are going to be imposed on you. What it is, it's eliminating tariffs, and the best description of it is to adopt free trade, which has been done by Singapore, 0 tariffs. It's been done by Switzerland, 0 tariffs. Australia and New Zealand are almost 0 tariffs. Hong Kong, 0 tariffs. And I think Israel's very low or 0 tariffs. And all these countries, since they've adopted the free trade route, have become more successful than they were before. So it's just a simple thing to do.
Yeah.
That's all they need to do is almost nothing. It's what Ronald Reagan said. Don't just do something, stand there. And the problem that we've got, as people who follow this will know, is that rather than prioritising Brexit, which means leaving and doing the things we've said and then concentrating on other things, what the government is doing, or Theresa May, who's not a natural negotiator at all, she said, I'm prioritising a deal with the EU, and by doing that, she's given all her power away.
Yeah, she's not a negotiator. Did you meet the Donald?
No, never met him. I've met Nigel Farage once, who's met the Donald, but that's the nearest.
You've danced with a man who's danced with the
I've probably met a few women who've known the Donald, but that's.
But I would imagine that you would get on with the Donald. I think he's probably your kind of business negotiator, apart from anything else. He does deals.
He's. I have to admit, he's just, even by the standard of businessman, he's a slightly strange dude. But more power. He's certainly been far more effective with Kim Jong in North Korea. Than the more intellectual approach of the Obama. So there is definitely room for someone who cuts through the detail, should we give him the benefit of the doubt, cuts through the detail and hits upon a solution. He certainly got Jean-Claude Juncker much more worried and in a much more compromising frame of mind than did Theresa May.
Yeah. Well, I was wondering, actually, that point you make there about intellectuals, about over-intellectualizing it. You look at the people who are behind Remain, Professor A.C. Whaling, always Richard Dawkins, all the academics, all these clever clogs, are all behind this sclerotic, anti-democratic, pointless institution, and the ordinary folk, the plebs, generally, your clientele among them, I imagine, just want to get out. We just want to be free, don't we?
Well, exactly. I mean, I think that's what people do think. It's very difficult to. I think there's an element of among the intellectuals following, I think, on the battles of the 20th century between democracies and communism and fascism, etc. And the intellectuals were often reluctant to abandon the communist creed, for example, right up until the end of the 20th century. And I have a feeling that it's because they don't like the idea so much of power being transferred to individuals, to the hoi polloi in a way. They're more comfortable, and this is true of Europe, I think, with power being wielded by people like them. The French call them les énarques. They're the people who've been to the big schools like they have, the big universities, and
they've got their boyfriend, bodyguard,
and all that stuff. So I think democracy is a rough old system.
Yes.
And politicians to be fair to them, they take quite a pummeling, and maybe at the end of a 20-year career, you just say, "Oh, it'd be so much nicer to be in Brussels, with Jean-Claude and Michel and nos amis européens, and not have to put up with this democratic stuff we have to be voted in. Imagine having to be voted in on television or fired on television." So it's a tough old game, democracy, but it's best.
Well, I was thinking that. I was going to make a strained analogy based on your business, which is that obviously there is a potential for customers to be rowdy and difficult and to disturb the neighbours after closing time. But at the same time, they're basically decent people, and if you look after them right, they're going to do the right thing. And isn't that rather like democracy itself? That there was this terrible... Brendan O'Neill's always going on about this absolute distrust that the elite has for the demos. They don't like them. They don't trust them.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose quite a lot of the elite do trust them in a way, and if you offered them some sort of undemocratic system, they'd probably run a mile. But in themselves, and it's probably the danger of an elite, and that's why you need the press, you need voting, is that if you've always been the brightest spark in your class at school, and then you go to a university and you hang around with people like you, there is a danger if you're Osborne and you're Cameron and you haven't worked 2 years in a pub or a factory, that you only know people like you,
Tim,
and therefore distrust them.
I was at university with all those people that you name, and even at the time, I knew that I wasn't quite right. I knew I didn't quite fit in, but I couldn't work out why. And it's only really since Brexit that I've understood there is this divide. And I think all Brexit did was make explicit a divide that hitherto had been implicit and unacknowledged and unspoken.
I wouldn't like to having said all that we've said, I wouldn't like to tar everyone with the same brush, because I think a lot of people, look at Rees-Mogg.
Have you met the Jacob?
Look at no, yes, I have met him briefly. Yeah, and look at Boris. They're some of the most articulate people on the Leave side. Have been to the same institutions. They tend to be a minority, non-conformists within those institutions. But it's not absolute, but there's definitely a pro-Remain clique.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, who have in the top level of the Treasury, the top 4 people in the government, and the Financial Times, and so on, who wield tremendous power.
Are you going to do any more stuff within Wetherspoons, like beer mats or anything, because you've got a big audience there that you could convert?
Well, we've put out Wetherspoon News, which has got a lot of stuff about for and against actually the Brexit arguments. And I've got a few more beer mats up my sleeve. I can't make an announcement now.
Right. Okay. But watch this.
Yeah.
Surface.
I will do such things, I know not what they are, but they shall be the terror of the earth. I remember from my school.
That's very good. That's King Lear.
King Lear.
Very impressive. Okay. And what do you, just on that subject, what do you think about, I've noticed that there's this worrying development whereby the left and the Remain faction are very good at kind of bullying businesses into rejecting people like me, for example, just stopping us getting funding or stopping us, companies that advertise on Breitbart, for example, are bullied by the left into saying, do you want to be associated with this product? Now, you're not afraid to let your business take a political view. Is that? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I think people accepted it, although it was controversial during the Euro era, and so I produced the arguments in the magazine during that time. And by the time it got to the referendum, I think pro-Remain customers knew that I was going to speak out. Probably some of them don't go to our pubs, I would imagine. But broadly speaking, by also presenting in our magazine an equal number of articles which are in favour of Remain, they've accepted that I can make the case for Brexit.
So that was your get out of jail free, that you just run some crappy arguments by Remain the losers.
Well, guys like Nick Clegg.
You didn't.
And Roy Hattersley. And
well, that's the last sodding time I'm going into Wetherspoons. Not that I've been into one yet, but you put me off now.
I thought I might.
That's really upsetting, actually.
Yeah, well, we I don't know whether we're supposed to, but we quote articles in full, put it that way, from a lot of the guys from the Financial Times who are pro EU, etc.
Do you really think they need any help? I mean, they've got the Financial Times, they've got the Economist, they've got the BBC, they've got the entirety of the civil service.
They've got the Guardian.
Got most of the Guardian. Yeah, I mean that's sort of like a struggling. I mean, who wins the Guardian? But yeah, they have got the Guardian. They've got the majority of the cabinet. They've got the European Union. They've got the CBI. Why are you helping these people, Tim?
Well, it's an interesting point. I would have thought that the editor of the Financial Times, I think his name is Richard Lambert, during the Euro campaign.
I think it's called Lionel Barber.
That's the one now.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I thought they would have had a lot more credibility if they presented all the way through arguments for both sides, and said, look, I've read these articles, I've read what our readers have said about them in the letters, we've debated this matter fully, and I've come down on the side of the Euro, or pro-Remain, even so. Whereas what they've done is their natural tendency is, in effect, to censor the opposite argument. And so I think it's got more credibility in Wetherspoon News. I mean, I know it's not the Financial Times, but it's very widely read if you present both sides.
Well, you get it in the pubs, presumably.
Yes.
And it's free. You
free.
can read it while you're having a drink.
Yeah.
So what would its circulation be?
Well, we print about 400,000 copies, and it's there sitting in the pubs for about 2 months. So I think it's got quite a wide. You're
probably talking about what, 5 readers per. So
we say 2 million.
2 million. No, I guess right.
Yeah.
Just outline briefly what you think might happen, and what good news you have for us about how it's all going to go. How are we going to beat off this latest Project Fear thing and get real Brexit?
I think we just have to say that all the arguments now seem to be boiling down. A lot of the arguments have been lost, so no one's really saying anymore that it's that Brexit equals racism. That's been lost, and they're not much saying anymore that food prices will go up if we leave the EU,
because that's a lie.
They've lost that
Yeah.
argument as well. So a lot of these arguments along the way have been lost. So the latest argument seems to be this: when we leave the EU, there's a danger that there'll be a hold up at the port for a week or two.
Yeah.
And I just don't think it's that powerful an argument. And it's not going to convince many people. So we just have to make sure that people realise that there are a lot of people that aren't in the EU. The Aussies aren't in the EU. The Canadians and the Americans aren't. And there's no hold up in the ports in Perth or in New York or in Quebec.
Yeah.
So it's a slightly desperado argument now, although it's slightly disturbing that it seems to be emanating from the cabinet.
The cabinet and on the instructions, I think, of the civil service. I mean, it is like yes, Prime Minister, isn't it? You've got these mandarins telling us.
Yeah, but you're a Mandarin who's not squashed by a Prime Minister is a bit of a worry when you get 70 documents coming out in August saying how dire things are going to be.
Yeah. But are you feeling still...
Well, I mean,
Good.
for my own business, I know some things have got a genuine undercurrent of danger. So the millennium bug is widely regarded as being overdone.
Yeah.
And we spent a few million quid, and other companies spent a lot more making sure our fridges didn't stop, etc., etc. But there are lots of people out there, because they can make money out of it, saying when the year 2000 hits, you've got to do all this stuff. Not one person has said to anyone at Wetherspoon, when we leave on the 30th of March, you've got all these things to do. There's nothing to do.
Yeah.
We just leave.
Yeah.
And reduce food prices, and we can catch our own salmon and cod.
Do you know what? I think you should just go on TV every day and just say that. It makes so much sense.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it? It's a very bizarre.
That's what we need, Tim. You need to just go out there and just say it in your plain, slightly strange accented English, and we'll win.
I'll organise it for you.
Good, thank you. Well, it's been great having you on the podcast. Thank you so much. You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest. Gosh, wasn't he wonderful? Tim Martin of Wetherspoons. Thank you and goodbye.
So kind.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson.
Everything in hip-hop is not bad. Kanye agreed with us, so let's love him today until he raps tomorrow and you turn your back. Because if you jump off when the fun of the moment is over, then you are in fact making Kanye the token he is accused of being. So please, don't do that. Don't go there.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson. Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.